Blog Talk Radio.
Good day to all. Thank you for tuning in to the Uvisualeyes show, where you will experience the top, most powerful, insightful, and talented teachers, speakers, and writers on inner wisdom, personal evolution, and love. Here you will have the opportunity to learn how to create or manifest the life experience you prefer. This is your host and life transformation coach and energy healer, Michelle Kraft. Welcome. If you missed the last show with David G., featuring his powerful book, Secrets of Meditation, you will find the show in the archives, as well as numerous other amazing shows, and can listen at your leisure. On November 6th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, tune into the Uvisualeyes show and discover the secret to your personal empowerment and a life of ecstatic joy with Peter Calhoun and his new book, Life Without Limits. And on November 29th, unravel the powerful effects of sound healing with Jonathan Goldman, reveals his secrets in his book, The Divine Name. Also, if you have a question for our guest, you can call in. The number is there on the show page. Also, callers will receive a free gift just for calling in. The Uvisualeyes show is becoming a more exciting experience every week. Without fail, there is yet another amazing healer, teacher, or shaman as my guest here, sharing their extraordinary insights. And now broadcasting, well, it's your guest, from various parts of the world. It's an even more stimulating and evocative experience. Today's exciting topic, magic. Mitch Williams is an international award-winning magician and sleight-of-hand artist, an inspirational teacher, and an authority on creativity, personal transformation, and peak performance. As an entertainer, he has performed for audiences throughout the U.S. and Canada, in Japan, and in Europe. For over 45 years, he has been an avid student of cutting-edge information on human development, transformational psychology, future studies, and psychospirituality. As a speaker, Mitch has presented seminars and workshops which combine his astounding magic with uplifting and thought-provoking messages on the real magic within and around us for corporations, service organizations, as well as unity and religious science churches and other New Thought groups throughout the country to rave reviews. A true modern Renaissance man, he is an accomplished artist, musician, poet, author, athlete, gourmet cook, and a martial artist with a fourth-degree belt in judo. Broadcasting live today from Houston on the Uvisualeyes show, we bring you Mitch Williams. Welcome to the Uvisualeyes show, Mitch.
Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be here.
I'm so excited you're here. I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed A Call to Magic. It definitely is written well, and I surprised myself with multiple aha moments throughout the book.
That's great.
Just when we think we know, somebody says it a slightly different way. And that's what I noticed that was prevalent in the book for me, is that, just having something explained or said in a different way makes such a difference. And you have done a beautiful job explaining so many things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. First, I'd like to ask you, what inspired you to write A Call to Magic, of course, besides being a magician?
Well, it's been a long time coming. It's really a culmination of a lifetime of study and applying the principles in the book and living them in my own life. And, there are things that have made a big difference for me, and there's something that I had a passion for sharing with others. And, I do that in my performances and in my talks and workshops. But I wanted to kind of put it all together into a book and really say what I wanted to say.
Well, you've done that well, and I think you're downplaying this a little bit. It's an extraordinary book as far as how it's compiled and what your base knowledge is. So, I mean, it's quite a collection. And I first would like to, before we get started, how you began your book. I loved how you began your book with a question. And that is, how is that some people can achieve beyond the norm? What other obstacles that prevent us from doing so, and how can we overcome those obstacles? And that's kind of where you get started. So,
yeah, well, that was a big question in my life from very early on. I had endeavors that I was passionate about, both judo and athletics and martial arts, and also performing and magic and art and creativity. And I particularly from being in judo, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to train with a couple of our Olympic judo teams at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. And I began, studying what it is that allows some people to excel at what they do, and I became fascinated with that, and it became a real passion, a real study for me, and it has evolved into quite a bit more than that too, into spiritual dimensions as well.
Well, that was quite apparent in the book. And
Thanks.
I would like to read a quote from your book that I do love, and it is, "I do believe in magic. I believe the very essence and nature of life is magical, and we forget it at our peril. A life devoid of magic and wonder is, to my mind, little more than mere existing. There is magic all around us all the time, and the key is to simply remember to look for it." That's absolutely beautiful and inspiring.
Thanks. Yeah, as a performing magician, that's one of the things that really inspires me, is seeing how people respond to that experience of wonder. When I do magic for people, and you can see their eyes light up, and there's something about magic that brings out the child in everyone. And I think that experience goes to the heart of who we are as human beings. That experience of wonder, it touches us at deep levels, and it does bring out that childlike essence. The essence of who we really are. Beyond our ideas of self. It goes a lot deeper. And for me, that's what magic is all about. It's about, breaking through our normal perceptions to an in-the-moment awareness of wonder and awe, and realizing that literally everything is awe-inspiring.
Well, talk to us about the forms of magic that our life can come in our lives. I mean, one form of, you're writing there, one form of magical moment can come when we are totally immersed in meaningful work. And, of course, as a magician, you're probably quite immersed in your work at that time.
Oh, yeah, definitely. One of the great things about performing magic for me is that I'm as caught up in the moments of wonder as the audience is. It's for me, it's just as magical as it is for them. I get lost in that moment, and I think it's being in that moment where time goes away, and we're not thinking about past and future. We're just totally immersed in an experience. Whether that experience is meaningful work that we get involved in, and we lose track of time, or whether it's seeing a beautiful sunrise or anything else that brings us completely into the present moment. So much of our lives we spend trapped in worrying about the future or feeling guilty about the past, and neither one of them are really real in any real sense. And it's only in this present moment that we can have any sense of self and come into touch with who we really are. And I think that's where our inspiration for life lies, in those moments. And in the book, I call those magical moments. psychologist Abraham Maslow called these peak experiences, and he did a whole study on these experiences of those moments when you're totally caught up in one experience, and there may be a sense of being your senses are super heightened, and it's a moment of timelessness. And he found that all self-actualized people have these experiences. It's one of the things that really high-achieving individuals had in common. He made a study of this in depth, and that was one of the things. These peak experiences, or what I call magical moments, are one of the things that lead us to greater accomplishment in our lives.
I completely agree, because you talk about being immersed in meaningful work, and I've experienced that in a few ways in my life. First and primarily as an artist. Once I'm in my painting or my sculpting, I'm so immersed in that I'll look up hours later and wow, I should eat. Because I haven't even noticed that I haven't stopped. I worked through lunch, and I did not feel the hunger, and it bypasses so many of these things, and so in the moment. And it's the same way with my shows. I get so involved. But before I know it, it's over with, and I'm like, what? What?
Yeah, well, it's the point of not feeling hungry and not realizing that your body needs food is I think a significant one, because in those magical moments we really go beyond the merely physical level of existence, the physical level, to something deeper, something truer, something more real and more profound. And that's the wonder of those moments.
It definitely is. And it leads me to ask a question that you already asked in the book, and that is how, for us everyday people who are not magicians, how can we bring more magic into our lives?
Well, I think I would take issue with that idea that everyday people aren't magicians. And I think that's the starting point. Is that
right?
When we shift our perceptions of who we are, and realize that we are magical beings, magical creative beings that have these wondrous untapped abilities. That shift in perspective, in perceptions of ourself, I think is a starting point. It's being open to seeing ourselves in bigger terms than just this physical, emotional, mental personality.
Right. And in your book, you talk about the process of stepping out of a time-based perception. I mean, definitely, most of the book is very focused around perception, which makes complete sense, because you are talking about magic and perception. But you talk about the process of stepping out of time-based perception into fully living in the present moment. And is this what we're talking about when when you want to live more of a magical life, is being centered there?
Yeah. Well, life on this planet is stressful. There is no doubt about it. And the Buddha said that life is suffering. But the paradox is that once you fully accept the suffering, you no longer experience it that way. And it really is a shift in perceptions. We as one of the things that I talk about in the book is that we think that how we perceive the world is how the world really is, but nothing could be further from the truth. That's one of the big lessons of magic. I mean, I shift people's perceptions all the time with what I do, and I do it for fun, and I do it in ways that hopefully have an emotional impact on people. But it just goes to point out that the way we think things are isn't the way things really are. The problem is, though, that we think that our perceptions reflect reality, and then those perceptions become beliefs about the world, and then we forget that we've perceived and chosen beliefs based on those perceptions, so that those beliefs then become an aspect of who we see ourselves as being. We begin to identify with those beliefs, so that unconsciously we no longer even realize they're beliefs. We just think that's how things are. But the problem is they're not how things are, because our perceptions they're never complete. You know, one of the examples is that, I mean, if you look at a chair, you can't see all four legs of the chair all at the same time. And you make assumptions about it based on your perceptions of the past and your experience of those perceptions. So you just assume that the fourth leg is there, and you wouldn't dream of going around and going all the way around a chair to make sure they're there before you sat down on it. You make assumptions based on those perceptions. And for the most part, those assumptions are valid and they're fine. But when we begin to expand them into the world, they're never accurate. And when I have beliefs that, you know, my perceptions of things are always going to be different than someone else's, and if we're identifying with our beliefs and making them part of who we are, and then if your perceptions of things and beliefs about things are different than mine, then I will feel personally threatened by that, because it threatens my sense of who I am. And so what we have to do is we have to make those choices conscious again. We have to realize that we're choosing our beliefs based on misperceptions of the world around us. And then we can bring it back into our conscious control, so to speak.
Right. And we want to put it in a tidy little box when we think we understand something and then move on. And so, but in order for us to hold on to a belief, we have to fight for it and defend it.
Yeah.
In order to defend the nice little tidy box that we don't want to go back in and open again, because we've already decided that that's how it is.
Yeah.
That's one of the harder things for people to do. And, you know, you going back to what you were talking about, the suffering and, you know, what Buddha said, and I've read this before, and, you know, I'm trying to reconcile a lot of things in my life, because I've learned so much about so many different ideas, and that is one of them, because, you know, I have this idea in my mind. Well, first of all, you know, reality is not static. We can change that reality at any given moment, but then we hear from, you know, Buddha that you know, suffering, and once we accept that this life is painful, then it no longer becomes painful. And like many others, it's a difficult one for us to get to and to challenge, you know, because in order for us to know this, we have to decide that that's true. And I'm always on a mission to change how I look at things, so that and change my reality by how I look at things, that I don't want to accept that, you know, that statement that just admit that life's painful. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, you know, that's the great paradox, and I love paradoxes, because whenever you find two things that seem to be true, that seem to be in conflict with one another, usually behind it lies an even greater truth. So I love exploring paradoxes, and for me, it's all about process. It's understanding that the more we can accept this present moment exactly as it is, the more we stop resisting, and therefore we live in the moment instead of you know, lost in our perceptions. And I think when we encounter pain, it's because I mean, some things are you know, you can't avoid it. We just experience them as painful. Losses in our lives can be very painful. But, you know, as we accept that, we come to understand that pain has a tempering effect on our lives. It allows us to, you know, to let go of some of those deeper attachments that might be unhealthy, and to grow beyond them. You know, and I think it's a great practice to, whenever you're experiencing any kind of discomfort or resistance or pain of any kind, to simply stop and see if you can notice if you're judging it as something that's bad. And if you are, just look at that. Just experience what it feels like to think that. And sometimes what will happen is that you may not even shift your emotional experience of it, for example, but you begin to disidentify with that experience. You step back into a broader perspective so that while you may still have the emotional pain, you may be experiencing it, you no longer feel as attached to it. It's no longer who we are, in other words. It's like we're stepping back and observing someone else. But it's kind of like we're stepping back into a more expansive experience of ourselves, and we realize that emotional pain and even our emotional identity isn't who we really are. And it's okay to have that pain. It's okay to experience it. But as long as you're resisting it, it just causes it to persist. Resistance causes persistence. So as you just observe it, don't try to get rid of it. Don't try to judge it. Don't try to make it bad or wrong. You just notice it. And after a while, you find that it's no longer there.
Right. Well, it's something you put in the statement around this topic. You said, I think it's essential that we not reach conclusions with our beliefs, but instead be in a constant state of inquiry.
Yeah.
And I liked that, and you don't realize just how difficult it is until you try it.
Sure.
Because
of course it is.
Our mind just wants to go to conclusions. It just grabs all the information around and, this is it. This is the way it is. And I've gotten more and more lessons, I tell you, in the last couple of years that I'll make a conclusion and then even a judgment and turn around and find out that I was completely wrong about that person or why they did this or what was going on there. And I'm like, yeah, well, there you go. That's the conclusion, eh?
Yeah, it's so true. And life has a way of doing that, too.
Well, and I think noticing it, though, says a lot for where I'm at in my life, though. To stop and go, oh, I made a judgment on that. Ooh, look at that one. That wasn't, that was a judgment, and it wasn't even really the truth of what was going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for me in my growth. And your book just reinforced many of those things. It's funny how you do pick up a book at a time in your life that you go, wow, I needed to hear that. So anyway,
it's all too true.
We have to. What's that?
It's all too true. That happens so often.
Yeah. So we've covered quite a few things, but this book is just astounding as far as the amount of topics, and so we're going to have to move along here. Let's jump on down to talk to us about ego, because I think that's a real big part of getting over so many things.
Yeah, well, I think it goes to the heart of the human problem. But as I was saying, our perceptions are never completely accurate, and our prime perception is our perception of who we are as individuals. And unfortunately, because of conditioning and because of choices that we make that are erroneous and based on false perceptions, we, over time, build a false self that isn't who we are, and it's not who we really are at deeper levels, the authentic self. It's a false self that's based on limitation. It's the little me is what Eckhart Tolle calls it.
Yeah.
It's that idea of self that we then, because it's a false idea and because we think it's who we are, we then have to begin defending constantly. Because at some level we know it's not who we really are, and yet we're identifying with it, and because we think it's who we are, it becomes our identity. And so anytime we're exposed to anything that contradicts that idea of who we are, we feel threatened. We feel our sense of self is threatened. And so we have, the ego takes on a life of its own. This little self takes on a life of its own so that it becomes an identity that sets up a complex series of self-preservation, if you will, of self-defensive mechanisms, and it's very complex, and it's difficult to unravel until you really begin to just look at it.
Right, and you talk about releasing our ego, and this is a huge topic, so I know we can't really delve into all the details. I think it's best, in order to show our listeners about what's in your book, talk about moving into the realm of the authentic self and how that happens, and I mean what we can do, a few tips without, going into depth.
Well, I think the first step is just understanding that we have this false self, the ego, and understanding that there may be something more, at least accepting the possibility that there may be something more to who we are, and that it may be greater and vaster and not separate from all that surrounds it. We think that we're these separate little identities, but I think the reality is that we're connected in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. And that's an aspect of who we are, our authentic self. And so, the authentic self just is. It doesn't need us to believe in it. It doesn't need us to even experience it necessarily. It just is what it is. But this belief in the ego self, in the false self, prevents us from experiencing who we really are. And again, the ego's way of dealing with ego problems is to try to tear itself apart. So when you first notice that you're acting like an ego, you're acting defensively, or you're attacking someone, or you're acting in some other separative way, the immediate thing is to feel guilty about it. Oh, I shouldn't be doing that. Or to get mad at someone else. You project it out onto someone else and say, oh, they shouldn't be doing that to me. But the more you resist it, again, it just causes it to persist because, guilt. You feel the guilt, and then you get more trapped in the ego, and it's this snowball situation that just begins to reinforce itself. So what you have to do is just stop and step back and notice what you're doing. Just pay attention. When you find yourself acting in an ego-based way, you don't judge it. You don't say that, oh, I shouldn't be doing that. You just notice what you're doing. And again, it allows you to step back out of that prison of past and future into this moment right now.
Right, and you were talking a lot about releasing our attachments, and as kind of public figures, my question in all of it was, as a public figure, where my livelihood is based on how many people I attract to me, and usually based on a self-image, how will giving up all forms of identification affect my public awareness? I mean, as I grow my business, I must promote myself, obviously, but I got to put the absolute best positive image of me forward. So if I give up ego, how do I go about this? I mean, I wouldn't get very far in the public eye if I just posted on my website and, various networks some willy-nilly snapshot that was taken while I was throwing dripping piece of pizza down my gullet with my hair running amok. I mean, you did talk about this.
Well, as an entertainer that has worked nationally and internationally, I'm blatantly aware of those issues. So, I hear you. I understand what you're saying, and I identify with that too. But I also realize that even asking that question is coming from an ego perspective.
Right.
It's tough to get out of that. But that's okay. You live your life and you do what you need to do. And I think the most important thing is how are you making your moment-to-moment decisions? Is it from that ego framework, or is it by stepping back and listening to that intuitive voice of the authentic self? And that's the question. I don't think the nuts and bolts of how you live your life really, in the big picture, matter all that much. It's where it's coming from. It's how and why you're making the decisions that you do, and how you're experiencing it and where you're experiencing it from. If you're constantly reinforcing the ego, well, you might want to take a look at that. And you can do all the same things. You can promote yourself, and you can, put this image out there with the understanding that, this is part of the game that we're playing, and I understand that it's an illusion, and that's okay, because I enjoy it. It's fun, and the main thing is, am I listening to that intuitive, authentic self, and, am I open to serving other people? Because that's really what the authentic self is about. It's about understanding that this isn't just about me. It's about service. It's about, something bigger. It's about helping other people to step out of the ego wherever possible. And, if you're doing that, and if you're listening to that intuitive voice, I think you're going to be fine, regardless of what the externals are of what you're doing.
So I think that's what you're talking about, your intention being pure. I mean, you speak about this again, of course, in Chapter 9 with the global brain and the collective group good, So that goes along with the self-promotion. And I know, we talked about that struggle. So how do you reconcile that as far as the global idea?
Well, all of the ideas that we're talking about, the false self of the ego, as well as the authentic self, apply equally to groups of people as they do to individuals. And when we're acting in ways that are competitive and based on greed and based on differences and separation, we're acting as an ego, as a group. Whether that group is your family or your neighborhood or your nation or the whole world.
Right.
Ultimately, we're all in this together. We're all interconnected infinitely. And the more we begin to actually realize that and to express it in our lives as a living, breathing reality, well, the more we begin to reflect the authentic self that is this group of humanity on our planet.
Right. There were so many interesting topics. Like, I'm going through the notes I made as I read, going, oh, yeah, I wanted to say that. I want to talk about that. There's just too many things here. One of the things I really did appreciate, though, is you write about, in Chapter 6, about cause and effect. And you write that this, I want to, quote you here because I want to say something here, but guilt is just another ego distortion geared to keep us in a state of separation and conflict. And this helped me so much because, I've battled, and I know I'm not unique, but myself, I have battled with guilt off and on. And it's an insidious disease, So I wanted to say for sure that I appreciated this description, because who I really am knows that guilt is worthless and just, like you said, a state of separation, keeps me in a state of separation. Yeah. But I appreciated you stating that. I think that that's something really important for people to read. So, let me see. There was just something more important, I'm sure, that I want to talk about. I know what it was. You speak of, you told a story that I had never heard before, and of course, it brought tears to my eyes, and I really think it's profound and important here. And I'm going to read the quote from the book real quick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
It starts, of course, there's much more before it. Fortunately, there appears to be a trend arising towards shifting this approach, and that's the global brain. Early in 2011, rising from grassroots levels, protests, which began in Tunisia and then spread to Egypt and throughout the Middle East, demonstrated to the astounded eyes of the world the truly magical transformations that are possible through cooperative, peaceful, public, passive resistance. During the protests in Egypt, amazing stories of solidarity and unity began to emerge. Groups of Christians joined hands, forming human barriers to protect Muslims as they knelt for daily prayers. In similar cases, Muslims protected Coptic Christians as they prayed. The symbol of a Muslim crescent embracing a Christian cross began to spring up everywhere in cases where police and military offered no protection from chaos and looting. Ordinary citizens stepped forward and joined together to protect not only their own neighborhoods, but also such public assets as the historic library in Alexandria. Amazingly, this was an uprising with no definite leaders, no central charismatic personalities around which others rallied. It was a movement where the voice of the people spoke forth clearly as a true power of its own. I loved this. It gave me goosebumps, and I really believe in and desire this kind of cooperative effort and manifesting in our world. You know, something I also know is that we must. This is I'm always trying to reconcile. I guess it's paying attention to those new things I've learned, you know, not sticking with my beliefs. So something I also know along with this is that we must tend to our own corrections or diseases of mind first before we can help others or become a part of a group of effort, because standing in the midst of a confused group doesn't not promote clarity. Yeah. You know, my work's purpose is to help people heal so that they can do much more than they are now. And I know you do talk about, of course, leading up to this, you know, the problem our listeners might have is they haven't read this, and I'm passionate here. I'm like, how do you reconcile this, Mitch Williams?
So,
I'm
not even sure where to start with that.
Yeah, I know. I opened up a big can of worm.
Yeah, I think one of the key words for me that keeps coming to me recently over and over is unity and diversity. It's understanding that they are not incompatible, that, you know, our differences are not reasons to keep ourselves apart, to prevent unity between ourselves. In fact, if seen correctly, I believe our differences are things that will bring us together, because it is those differences that make us unique and interesting and appealing, and we balance each other out in so many myriad ways. You know, if we were all the same, it would be a really boring world, you know.
Right.
But we think those differences are threatening, that someone different is threatening to us, and that's the ego perspective. And right. You know, as was the case in the protests in Egypt, I believe that's beginning to shift slowly but surely. And you know, I really believe that we're at an extremely significant point in the history of humanity, that, you know, we for a lot of reasons, but, you know, in part because of our interconnectedness through technology, you know, we're seeing that we are interconnected. That was always true, but now it's being demonstrated in blatantly unavoidable ways. And, you know, that's threatening to people if they're living from the perspective of the ego. You know, they find that threatening. But it's just a reality. You know, we are one humanity, and, you know, the more that we can accept that and experience it and live that way and understand that, you know, whatever I do to you, I'm doing to me. That's a much healthier perspective on things, I think.
Definitely. And, you know, there is something you talked about also, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, and I find that helping people to transcend those primal survival needs and learn to focus and manifest on a personal level first is much more effective. And that's what I was talking about, you know, earlier about, you know, promoting your own health and clarity before joining a a global brain kind of mentality. And, coming from a family, and I know I'm not alone, but coming from a family in which I was first trained to pay attention to others' needs and forget my own, kept me in a kind of a loop of focusing so much on others that I was drained of my own ability to create or manifest. Of course, these family members that was attending, that I'm talking about, stayed stuck in a never-ending survival mode loop in which most of them will never transcend, And earlier I talked about the guilt, and that's one of the issues because I went far away from the group in order to find who I really am, and struggled with guilt over doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've talked to many people that have done that. And I have my own forms of having done that in my life too. My family situation was a bit of an opposite to that. I was the star child. I got good grades, and I was good at what I did, and I got a lot of appreciation for that. But it wasn't always necessarily healthy either. And I had to. It developed a certain amount of arrogance and a certain amount of a very strong ego that I had to find my way out of through painful personal experience and making mistakes where I caused other people pain. And you develop humility, and you realize that it's not about guilt. It's about discovering who you are, and it's about seeing yourself as joined to other people, and it just goes on from there. But yeah, I mean, we do have those limitations that we have to break beyond. But again, I think the starting point is always becoming aware of them, and awareness is not only the starting point; it's also the whole point. Becoming more aware. That's what it's all about. Just growing awareness.
Right.
Yeah.
So talk to us about hero archetypes. And, you said hero archetypes can be used to help move us in the direction of self-actualization.
Yeah.
You say that the magician is a useful archetype. So tell us about that. What are the attributes of a magician that is helpful in self-actualization?
Well, and I want to start by saying that this is another huge paradox, because the magician is an identity that we take on to try to grow beyond our ego identity, but it's just one more identity, and if we get attached to that identity, then that's not any better necessarily.
Right.
It can be incrementally, but just to understand that it's a stepping stone. It's a target that we can move towards. So an archetype is basically a figure that appeals to all people at deep levels. Mythologies are filled with archetypes, and Jung did a lot of study into archetypes. But I find personally that the archetype of the magician holds a lot of power, because the magician is the person who can live in the world, but realize that that it is an illusion, that our perceptions are not real, and they're not therefore of the world. They can act in ways that are beyond this physical perspective of reality. And you can tap into abilities that aren't possible when you limit yourself to a purely physical perspective of things.
Right. I liked how you did the analogy with the archetypes, and another way to say that is that we have role models that we aspire towards that help pull us up and out and into the world and show our gifts. And I think that's a big point that you make in there. And we're way up in the book. There's just so many things here. I don't know if I want to open up the can of religion. That could be another whole show.
Yeah.
Let's skip on down to the magic of art, because as an artist, I paint, I sculpt, I write. There are just so many artful things. So let me ask you, what's art got to do with it?
Well, I think art has everything to do with it. I think in true ego perspective, we tend to put art in a little box. Art is painting. Art is, sculpture. Art is, we might stretch that a little bit and say, okay, art is music, okay? But, I think art is everything we do. Everything we do can be done artfully. And the whole process of art, to my mind, is that inspiration is the seed that comes from our authentic self, from that intuitive voice. And then because we're inspired by that, whatever the idea is that comes to us from our intuition, we want to share it in some way. We want to put it out there into the world. And so we want to, in order to do that, we live in a world of forms, so we have to create a form that will somehow express whatever it is that we have experienced at that intuitive level. And you can do that in any medium. It can be painting and music and sculpture, but it can be, gardening and cooking, and it can be talking to your friend when they don't feel good. There are artful ways to do literally anything, and it's all about having that intuitive inspiration, creating a mental image of what it is that you want to create from that inspiration, filling that thought form, if you will, with the energy of emotion in the form of a burning desire, and then somehow causing that to become a physical reality. And that's true regardless of whether that's creating some really magnificent work of art, or whether it's just saying the right words to the right person at the right time because you feel inspired to do so. It's artful living. And to me, that's the essence of being an artist.
Yeah, and they call you the Renaissance man, and that's something that I've been called before too. And I think that's that artful thing that you talk about. I mean, there's so many things that you can do and that you're good at, and I think that if you're involved to that level that we were talking about, where you forget everything and it's all about who you really are, just emerging, that's art.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really a perspective on life, and it's easy to say, oh well, look at these people. They're doing all these things, and they're artistic and they're creative, and a lot of people will say, well, I'm not creative at all. But you know what? That's just not true. And as we move more into a global experience of expressing who we really are, I really think that more and more that will just be how we live our lives. We all will be expressing ourselves artfully and artistically, and we all will be artists expressing who we are in our own unique way.
And that really brings me to what you were talking about in Chapter 14 about children. And children are both, you state children are both our greatest teachers and our greatest responsibility. And I think that they truly help us to be artistic about so many things. Yeah. Well,
one of the things that I mentioned in the book is that some of my favorite people are 3-year-olds. Because at 3 years old, they're just old enough to be able to begin to express themselves and to use language, and you get a glimpse for who they are. But they haven't been conditioned out of who they really are, their true, authentic self. In most cases, and if there's extreme abuse of some kind, they can be. But usually at that age, that true self to some degree is shining through. And children are filled with wonder, and they're totally in the moment. And they can go through a whole series of experiences emotionally in just a few minutes. They're not stuck on any one experience. And so I think there's so much we can learn from being with children. They're open and they're authentic in ways that we've been conditioned out of.
Exactly. And, I want to say that I was reading this chapter. Well, I actually just finished reading this chapter, and I'm here visiting, with my children and grandchildren in Houston. And that day, I was having kind of one of those days that I wasn't really happy about much of anything that was going on, one thing after another kind of day. Mm-hmm. And I just finished reading that chapter, and then I went to visit with one of my granddaughters, who is 3. And I found myself uplifted, and I was smiling, and I hadn't, really been doing that all day. And by the time the visit was over, I could feel the difference, in myself. And I sat her down specifically on the stairs, and I said, I wanted to tell you something. And she's like, what? And I said, I was having kind of a sad day, and you made me smile, and just spending time with you, it made me feel better. And she's like, Mimi, why were you sad? Because nothing was going my way. And she shook her head and laughed. I understand. She gave me a big hug and smiled. And, it just changed my whole spirit because I was caught up in big people stuff. And, she's bouncing around, not caring what anybody thinks or, and any problems she has go, like you said, rises with the emotion and it passes the next. And
kids are not attached to.
But it was so well timed after reading the chapter on that, and that I wanted to talk about that because I think that it's something my husband says quite a bit about paying attention to how children navigate and how they speak and what they think and how they play and try to be more childlike.
Yeah,
well, we're
children
getting
are.
down to the fire. Go ahead.
Yeah. Children are wonderful.
They are. I'm just enjoying, and they're even more wonderful when they're grandbabies. So I want to go ahead and say, as we close the show today, I invite you to visit Mitch's website at mitchinspires.com. And you can order Mitch's book, A Call to Magic, from Amazon.com. And I wanted to say, is there anything you would like to leave us with, Mitch, before we close up the show?
Yeah, well, I actually wanted to make a special offer to your listeners, if that would be all right.
That would be great.
For the next week, actually the next 6 days, up until through Halloween, which incidentally is also a National Magic Day, October 31st. If anyone purchases the paperback version of my book from Amazon, I will give them a free copy of an MP3 audio guided meditation called Magical Mind. It's an exercise that combines a deep relaxation and visualization. It's a very powerful exercise based on something called autogenic conditioning, which is one of the techniques used by Olympic athletes to program themselves for peak performance. And if anyone that purchases the paperback book, if they will forward me a copy of the receipt that they get from Amazon to my email address, which is info@mitchinspires.com, I will send them a link to this free audio. It's from a CD that I produced several years ago that I offer also. But it's a really great meditation. And for those who would prefer to read it online or on an ebook format, I also have some special offers coming up with the Kindle version. It's on a special 99-cent download right now, but there is going to be a free download for a few days coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks. And if anyone would like to be notified when that happens, they can go to mitchinspires.com/updates and just sign up, and I'll send them a note when that happens.
So does that include me and my listener too?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I'd be very interested in experiencing the meditation for sure. So anyway, and last words of magical inspiration.
I think just be in the moment. Notice that everything is every moment is a wonderful, magical moment, and aspire to live your life in that way.
Definitely, and A Call to Magic does give you great tools towards that and ideas. I learned so much from A Call to Magic, and I highly recommend it to anyone seeking to evolve and shift their perceptions to include a wider view of self and world. You will definitely appreciate the magical direction that is offered in A Call to Magic, and you will refer to this gem of knowledge. I will be referring to this gem of knowledge often.
I'm glad.
Well, Mitch, your astute and magical views and guidance on living a more magical life are powerful and clear. Thank you so much for sharing them with us and being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And remember, for the next 6 days, email Mitch and at his website, and you can get, if you buy the paperback Call to Magic, you can get a free download of his guided meditation. And that should prove to, go ahead.
Just send me the receipt and mention that you heard about it here on Uvisualeyes, too.
Yeah, the Uvisualeyes show mentioned that so that it's all clear. So, anyway, also please visit my website, themichellcraft.com, where you can learn more on how to manifest the reality you prefer using the tools provided, such as personalized visualizing videos that I design and produce starring you, as well as articles, resources, and life transformation coaching with me online and in person. Thank you again, Mitch.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you for listening. This has been your energy healer, life transformation coach, and host of the Uvisualeyes show, Michelle Craft. Until next time, happy manifesting and have a sweet, blessed day.